for the evening. This webinar is brought to you by Dr. Reddy's Foundation for Health Education. Dr. Reddy's Foundation for Health Education has been in the forefront of organizing soft skills and behavioral skills training programs for various healthcare professionals for more than a decade now. Customized training programs are held across the country to bring about transformation in delivering patient care. Dr. Reddy's Foundation for Health Education has impacted more than 250,000 healthcare professionals till date, which includes more than 26,000 senior consultants, 138,000 nurses, more than 33,000 physicians, 17,000 pharmacists, and 13,000 postgraduate doctors. DRFHE has also engaged 230,000 corporate employees on health awareness through Awareness for Life session till date. The topic for today's session is New Age Parenting. And to guide us on this, we have with us Professor Anupam Sibal. Professor Anupam Sibal has been a pediatrician for more than 25 years. Professor Sibal established the Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology and Hepatology in 1997 at Apollo Hospital, Delhi. He helped set up the first successful pediatric liver transplant program in India at Apollo, Delhi in 1998. The Apollo transplant program has performed more than 3,400 liver transplants, out of which 351 have been in children. Professor Sibal is the Group Medical Director of the Apollo Hospitals Group. Apollo Hospital Group is the largest integrated healthcare provider in India with 9,000 hospital beds across 73 hospitals. Professor Sibal was elected as the President, Global Association of Physicians of Indian Origin in January 2020. Professor Sibal is the author of the national bestseller, Is Your Child Ready to Face the World? Exploring the Crux of Parenting. This book asks and answers whether your child is ready to face the world. For the convenience of everyone, we would be happy to take the questions at the last. Now, without taking any more time, I would request Professor Sibal to please take over from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Asta. I want to thank the DRL team, the Pratibimb team for giving me this opportunity, and it's a privilege to interact with colleagues across the country. Life, as we know, has come to a standstill, and if it wasn't for technology, interactions of this nature would just not be possible. But I guess in the new normal, we're going to find ways and means to connect meaningfully, and I think today's interaction is going to set the stage for more such interactive sessions as time goes by. You know, when it comes to being a parent, it doesn't really matter who you are. You could be the president of a Fortune 500 company, a sports star, an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher. Because when you go back home, you're just a parent, nothing more, nothing less. So I was saying that, you know, when you go home, you're just a parent, nothing more, nothing less. When the news about President Obama being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize was made, his elder daughter Malaya went up to him and said, Dad, you won the Nobel Peace Prize, congratulations. And it's Bo's birthday. Bo, incidentally, is the Portuguese water dog that the president had presented to his daughters. And then the little one, Sasha, went up to President Obama and said, Dad, plus we have a 3-day weekend coming up. So you could be the president of the United States of America and be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, but for your daughters, you're just dad. And they want to talk about what is important in their life that day with their dad. For a child, being a child is very natural, but for an adult to become a parent, it's quite another story. You know, I've been a pediatrician for 25 years and I interact with parents every day. And quite often I ask them this question, are you stressed being a parent? And more often than not, the answer is a yes. And why is it that parents are stressed? They are stressed because they are worried about failing as a parent. There are many questions that bother a parent. Will my child become a responsible citizen? Will my child value family relationships? Will my child make a mark in his or her profession? Will my child leave the world a better place than he or she found it? Will my child be a nice human being? Will my child be caring and kind? Will my child get along with people? Will my child be successful? And in India, as parents, we're very worried about success And I think we perhaps attach too much importance to success. The list is endless, but there is one underlying sentiment, and which is, will I be able to discharge my duty as a parent to prepare my child to face the world? We are actually making life quite difficult for ourselves as parents because, we have this new bug. Of course, we as doctors interact with patients every day and see a lot of bugs. We see bacteria, we see fungal infection, we see viral infections. But I think there's one bug that has really consumed a lot of our attention. It's called the P bug. The P bug is the perfection bug. We want everything to be perfect. We want perfect lives, perfect job, perfect practice, perfect family, perfect holidays like the ones you see on Facebook, and everything has to be perfect. And in this pursuit of perfection, what we have started doing is expecting that our children will be perfect. So we want them to go to the top school. We want them, once they get older, to go to the top university, go to an Ivy League college if they're going to the US, to get into IIT and the top medical schools and the top law colleges. We want them to excel in declamation, not just academics, in sports, in everything else. And as a result of which, we're pushing them in multiple directions. We are really making life very difficult for them because we want perfect children. And while it's hard to become normal parents these days, we're trying to become super parents, and therefore the stress is increasing because these days it is really hard to communicate with children. They just don't have the time. If it was Facebook a while ago, it's Instagram today, and perhaps Snapchat, and tomorrow we have something else. Who knows what will become a rage. Also, the children of this generation are very different. They like to question. They like to examine. They like to re-examine. They like to argue. And many parents struggle with these kind of questions, and they find their children very argumentative. And therefore, communication becomes even harder. Won't all of us love to have a chat with our children? A heart-to-heart, meaningful chat, not every day, not every other day, but at least a few times a week. We yearn for that, don't we? But how do you talk to a generation that has no time to hear, forget, listen? Each one of us has so much to share from our experience. There's so much we've learned. There's so much that we want to share with our children so that they don't make the mistakes we've made. But the moment you say, in my experience, the child bolts. The child just stops to communicate. We need to remember what Charles Wadsworth had once said. By the time a man realizes that his father was right, he has a son who thinks he's wrong. Wouldn't it be nice to give children books to read? After all, what you're going to be 5 years from now is determined by the friends you keep and the books you read. Well, does it apply today? In a paper that was published in the United Kingdom, it was found that more than half the children prefer watching television over reading. And I think watching television is going to get replaced by spending time on the phone because they tend to watch programs on the phone rather than TV. And nearly a fifth, and this is very, very telling, would be embarrassed if their friends saw them reading. So if a child finds that something is going to be embarrassing in front of his peers, in front of his friends, he or she is not going to do that. So I think getting them to read is really hard. So how does one communicate with children? And this really brings me to the book that I wrote. It's called Is Your Child Ready to Face the World? And in the book, I describe a technique to communicate with children. And this was based on the experience of raising our child, Nandini, my wife, and I, how we communicated with Devang, our son. And the book really talks about our experiment with Devang. The technique's very simple. Anybody can do it. The idea really was to get 15 minutes of undivided attention. It's important to say undivided attention because if the child is distracted, there's no point having this conversation. Also, it couldn't be structured in that it would happen at 4 p.m. on a Saturday, and then it would be followed by another discussion, say at noon on Sunday. But then it becomes a formal communication, sort of scheduled communication, and children don't like that. So it had to be something that was spontaneous. It had to be something that was two-way. And what was done really was, it was encouraging Devang to really talk about something that happened in school, something that happened on the way back from school in the bus, or something that happened in a park, something that happened at a birthday party, an interaction with his friends. And then we would dip into our limited stock of stories and try and identify something that fitted in with the flavor. We would then talk about it in some detail if Devang was interested. Fortunately, the internet was at hand and we would sometimes do a search together, but it was very important for Devang to do the search. It was Devang who would be leading this discussion. And whenever he wanted to stop, we'd stop. Sometimes we would follow this with a visit to a museum, visit to an important monument, for example, visiting the Rajghat when we talk about Gandhiji. It would be perhaps reading a magazine, reading a book, watching a film, getting hold of a DVD. But what was important was that the moment Devang said he wanted to stop, we'd stop. And we would start again only when he wanted to start. Let me give you a few examples. You know, October is a very difficult month if you are a parent of a teenager. That's because Apple comes out with a new iPhone in October. And I'm sure many of you can identify with the dilemma of whether you're going to get your child that iPhone or not. So I remember distinctly, it was 2010 and Devang wanted an iPhone, new iPhone had come to the market, and he made a passionate case. You know, it's so beautiful, the technology is amazing, look at the smooth touch, I'll become so smart. You know, this technology is going to give me access to information. With this information, I'm going to do better at school and so on and so forth. And he really made a passionate case. It was amazing to see the kind of enthusiasm that Steve Jobs generated in this young generation. So there was the opportunity. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. Let's talk about his life. Dropping out of college after 6 months, setting up a company at the age of 21, making it a $2 billion enterprise, being sacked from the company that you created, being invited several years later to come back as the interim CEO while you created a company called Next and bought another company called Pixar to become the interim CEO and then finally the CEO of Apple and make it the most valuable company in history. What an interesting life. A life of rising, falling, and rising again. A life that gives such a fantastic example of determination, the power of determination. We were watching the Football World Cup in South Africa and Shakira was performing, and suddenly the camera shifted to Nelson Mandela. And voila, there came the opportunity that I had been waiting for to talk about forgiveness. You know, forgiveness is a very hard virtue to talk about. All of us have been hurt in our life, and it's very hard to forget, leave alone, forgive. But who can teach forgiveness better than Nelson Mandela? Nelson Mandela was tried for treason and he was sent to the Robben Island prison. His prison cell was 7 feet by 9 feet. He was a category D prisoner, which meant that he could have one visitor in 6 months. The mail that he got was always open and he could just write or receive one letter in 6 months. He was given the task of breaking stones that damaged his eyes, that damaged his lungs. When his elder son died, he was not given permission to attend his funeral. He spent 27 years in prison, 3 different prisons. And when he was released, he was 72 years old. He then led his party to victory and became the president of South Africa. And what did he do when he became president? For his inauguration, he invited Paul Gregory. Paul was the prison warder at the Robben Island prison. He invited Percy Yutar for a meal. Percy Yutar, incidentally, was the public prosecutor who had asked for the death penalty for Nelson Mandela. When people said, why did you invite Percy Yutar? He asked for the death penalty for you. And Nelson Mandela replied, he was just doing his duty. He was asked 27 years of oppression, 27 years of suffering. don't you hate your oppressors? And he said, hating clouds the mind. Leaders cannot afford to hate. What a powerful example of forgiveness. These days, kids decide what is bought. They decide the refrigerator, the television, the laptop, the phone, and of course, cars. So we were planning to buy a car. And Devang, of course, thought that he was in the driver's seat. We zeroed in on a Honda. And as we were finalizing the car, there came an opportunity to learn from the life of Soichiro Honda. Soichiro Honda was born in a village. Once a car came to his village and he ran behind the car and put his hand in the oil puddle that the car had left behind. Years later, Soichiro Honda said, I could never get the smell of that oil out of my mind. That day, Soichiro Honda had found his calling. He started making motorcycles, but what he really wanted to do was to make cars. He applied for permission, but the Japanese government said that there were already enough automobile manufacturers and he wasn't given permission to make cars. Honda became the first Japanese company to start manufacturing in the United States. Eventually ended up becoming the second largest automobile company in the world. Soichiro Honda had 150 patents, 470 inventions. He was honored with the Blue Ribbon, the highest award in Japan. He had honorary doctorates from 2 US universities, but he did not have a university diploma because he never completed college education. Soichiro Honda achieved what he did because he found his calling, and he found his calling as a child. We as parents need to help our children find their calling. This perhaps is more important than pushing them in a particular direction and focusing just on academics. Whenever we had these conversations, we always remembered not to talk about our experience because we tried to remind ourselves about what Mark Twain had said. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. Children perceive what they find in the environment. Their eyes intently see, their ears hear, and their mind processes. And this leaves an impression in their mind. And sometimes a child behaves 15 years later based on how his mother or father had reacted in a similar situation. And this is something that parents should not forget. Never forget this. And I think we should remember what Jim Hansen had said. Don't remember what you tried to teach them. They remember what you are. Quite often when children get older, we complain that they don't have time for us and they're on the iPad or the iPhone or a smartphone on the dining table. When we actually think back, we realize that we are the ones that introduced our child to that technology, and we got a great sense of pride when at the age of 2, we said, my child knows how to operate an iPad. The iPad didn't walk to the child, we made the child go to the iPad. So in many ways, how a child turns out to depends on how a parent behaves in front of his or her children. What values, what virtues did we discuss with them? Virtues, values that have been known for millennia. Virtues that make ordinary people extraordinary. Virtues that we all have tried to imbibe in ourselves in our daily lives, but virtues that are very difficult to make a part of our lives. Virtues such as humility, integrity, forgiveness, giving, courage. Let's talk about a few of these virtues. I hardly ever meet someone who's not under pressure. We are under pressure because we are at our best behavior at home, trying to be ideal parents, ideal children, siblings. We are under tremendous pressure at work because we are always trying to impress our superiors. We're trying to work very well with our peers, trying to supervise our juniors and trying to do the best at that. And basically, We all are under tremendous amount of pressure, and we built this pressure cooker kind of atmosphere around us. And many of us struggle with handling pressure. But then there are some people who are very good at handling pressure, and let me give you one such example. Ben and his brother were raised by Sonia, who was a single mom. Sonia had to keep more than one job to keep her boys at school and to maintain their home. Ben had two problems. One, his grades at school were poor. And that was really because he was very frustrated at home with this environment and there was very little to look forward to. And then Sonia realized that perhaps if Ben and his brother were given an opportunity to learn about the world outside their environment, perhaps their grades would improve. So she decided to get them books, but of course she couldn't buy them. So she would get books from the library and the boys would have to read the book and then make a summary which would be rated by Sonia. So as Ben started to read, he realized that he could be an engineer one day, he could be an astronaut the other day, a lawyer, a doctor, and as a result of which his grades started to improve. But he had this other big problem, and this problem was with anger management. Once he hit his mother because they fought over the choice of clothes. Once he took out a knife and tried to stab his best friend because they argued about the choice of radio stations. When he tried to stab his friend, Ben realized that he had a very serious problem with anger, and luckily the penknife went into the buckle of the belt, otherwise Ben would have been sent to prison. That day he locked himself in the washroom, he took the Bible with him, he prayed to God to help him control his anger. He came out several hours later and he said that he decided that day that he was never going to get angry. Remember, he was only a child. Now with the reading and a better handle on anger, Ben became an exceptional student. His grades became brilliant. He graduated from high school. He decided to become a doctor. But the family had no money, got a scholarship, went to college, then went to medical school, then did a residency, then did a fellowship in neurosurgery, then did a fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery. And at a very young age, he became the chief of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. He was the first neurosurgeon in the world to separate conjoined twins, and he did that with the Binder twins, the Banda twins, and he did many such operations. Books started to be written about him. Ben Carson, the man with the gifted hands. In 2005, these twins were referred to us from Patna to Apollo Hospital, Delhi for a separation. And because such an operation had never been performed in India, I decided to get in touch with Ben. So I called up Hopkins, had a telephonic discussion with Ben and invited him to come to Delhi to assess these children and advise us. And he came to Delhi with his wife. The family, of course, decided that they didn't want the separation, but the time that Ben spent with us gave us the opportunity to understand Ben and learn about his amazing life. So I asked Ben, I said, Ben, is it true that you never get angry? You're a neurosurgeon. What if the staff, if the scrub nurse or if the main OT nurse hasn't put the instruments the way you wanted, or if the anesthetist is late or something's not right in the OT, you get angry? He said, no. Asked his wife, is it true that he doesn't get angry? And she said, yeah, I've never seen him get angry. And Ben said that the last time I got angry was when I tried to stab my friend. And I asked him, how do you cope with the pressure? Intense profession, neurosurgery, you do separation of conjoined twins. And he said, I said, how do you manage this profession? And he said, the pressure never goes away, but I feed off the pressure. And this is so important, I'd like to repeat it. Feed off the pressure. Ben Carson now is the United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I don't know how many of us have visited the Akshardham temple in Delhi. It's a beautiful temple. There's a fantastic exposition of India's culture and heritage. And it's not surprising that many heads of state are invited to visit the Akshardham temple. Once a head of state visited the Akshardham temple, and after his tour, he asked Swami Gyanmuni Das ji, and he heads this temple, Swamiji, I find the pressure of running my country too much. Give me some spiritual advice. And this is what Swamiji said, and he once told me this. So Swamiji said, when you carry a pitcher of water on your head and you walk, you're very worried that you're going to spill the water, right? And the president said, yes. He said, when you go diving in the ocean, You have gallons and gallons of water above your head. Do you feel the pressure? And the president said, no. So Swamiji said the difference is that when you're carrying the pitcher, you believe you are carrying the pitcher. But when you go diving, you don't think you're carrying the gallons of water above your head. So Mr. President, stop thinking that you're running the country and the pressure will ease. Get tough, don't work under pressure, work over pressure. You know, when a child learns to ride a cycle, he or she falls. And we encourage them and we said, yeah, you can't learn how to ride a cycle if you don't fall. But quite often when a child makes a mistake in another area, we're not so receptive. The child comes to his parent, his or her parents and says, you know, I made this mistake. And then we tend to get judgmental and we say, no, you shouldn't have done this or you should have done it this way. So the child will do it once, twice. And after that, the child says, you know, what's the point? You know, they're just going to tell me that I shouldn't have done it this way. And that bridge that is very important for a child to walk on, it's burnt. Everybody has to make mistakes. It's only through mistakes that you learn, and mistakes actually help you learn new skills, become a better person. And it's not just ordinary men and women who make mistakes. People destined to become great also make mistakes. Look at Emperor Ashoka. After the Kalinga War, when he saw the orphans and he saw the wailing wives and he saw bloodshed and he saw the soldiers in pain, he underwent a transformation and he decided to follow Dhamma. He decided to spread the word of Ahimsa across his empire and beyond his empire. We remember how great Emperor Ashoka was when we look at the Ashoka emblem. H.G. Wells, the noted historian, wrote about Ashoka. In the history of the world, there have been thousands of kings and emperors who call themselves their highness, their majesties, their exalted majesties, and so on. They shone for a brief moment and as quickly disappear. But Ashoka shines and shines brightly like a bright star even unto this day. Would Ashoka have become such a great emperor if he had not made a mistake that he realized was a mistake? Dr. Watson, who set up IBM, had once said, you want to improve your success rate, double your error rate. In the 50s, an employee made a big mistake that resulted in IBM losing $1 million. And $1 million at that point in time was a lot of money. So he knew that he was going to get fired and he put in his resignation and the resignation went up to Dr. Watson. So Dr. Watson called the employee and said, fire you? Do you think I'm going to fire you? I just spent $1 million on your education. What an approach to encourage people to learn from their mistakes. There was once a pot bearer and he carried 2 pots at each end of a long pole, and he would go from his master's house to a lake and fill the 2 pots with water and then come back to the master's home. One of the pots was perfect and the other had a crack, and as a result of the crack, water would spill, and this pot that had the crack went to the bearer one day and said, you know, I feel so inadequate. Because of my crack, half the water that you carry does not reach your master's home and you're never able to give 2 pots of water. You should discard me and replace me with a new pot. So the pot bearer smiled and he said, when we come back from the lake to the master's house, please see the path tomorrow. So the next day as they were walking, the pot saw beautiful flowers. And when they reached the master's home, the pot said, yes, of course, I saw the beautiful flowers, but that still makes me feel inadequate. And then the pot bearer said, you know, I knew that you had a crack. So I planted seeds along your side of the path because I knew that the water from you will help these seeds become beautiful flowers. And it is because of you and the crack that you have that I've been able to deliver beautiful flowers to my master's home. Sometimes we don't realize that 2 children in the family can be so different. We think that one of them is perfect and the other's not. Some children like to talk, the others like to be with themselves. Some children want to study, some children want to play. It is really not for us to judge which out of the 2 is going to be perfect. Which out of the 2 is going to be better, because both of them or three of them will in their own way make a contribution to the family. Our job is to unconditionally love them and not compare them. Gandhiji had said, I look only to the good qualities of men, not being faultless myself. I wouldn't presume to probe into the fault of others. When we are not perfect, how can we expect perfection in our children? So each one of us wants to do so much and we try, and then we meet with opposition and we give up. And then we say, if only my boss was more understanding, or if my family was more receptive, or if my co-workers are more encouraging, I would have achieved so much. So we try and we give up. But then there are some people who never give up. Jodie Foster was a toddler when she started to develop convulsions. She developed 1 convulsion, as became 2, 5, 10, 20. There came a time when she would have more than 100 convulsions a day. And it's very scary for a parent to see a child have a convulsion. And imagine 100 convulsions. So she went on to 1 anti-epileptic, then 2, then 3, then 4. But despite that, her convulsions continued to get worse. They went from one specialist to another, and finally a diagnosis of Rasmussen's encephalitis was made. And in this condition, which typically affects normal healthy children between the age of 2 and 10, between 1 in 500,000 to 1,000,000 children, convulsions develop in one hemisphere. The convulsions get progressively worse. There comes a time where the quality of the life of the child is compromised, cognitive function, physical functions go, and this can be terminal. So Jodie's parents went to a specialist who said, yes, there is a treatment. The treatment is radical, and the treatment is called radical hemispherectomy. In fact, calling it radical is perhaps an understatement. This treatment involves removing not 10%, 20, 30, 40, but 50% of the brain. So the treatment is removing the hemisphere from where the convulsions start, and with the removal of half the brain, the convulsions go away. But we know that small parts of the brain control very important functions. So what would happen to a child when half the brain is removed? So the surgeon explained that there is a degree of neuroplasticity in young children. And when half the brain is removed, the other hemisphere takes over the function of the hemisphere that's removed. Of course, the functions don't return completely. The rehabilitation is prolonged, but that's the only way the convulsions go away. So the Miller family thought for a while, and they had decided that they weren't going to give up. So Jodie underwent a radical hemispherectomy. She went into rehab. The rehab was very prolonged. She finally went home, joined nursery, went to junior school, middle school, high school, university. Jodie now wants to be a teacher. Imagine living your dreams with half your brain. Can any of us afford to complain? Hope can be a powerful force. Maybe there's no actual magic in it, but when you know what you hope for most and hold it like a light within you, you can make things happen almost like magic. Now, each one of us is so fortunate. We have a home, we have a family, we have a job, we have food, we have clothes, we have friends. But how grateful are we for what we have? Do we realize the value of friendship till we lose that friend? Do we realize the value of good health till we become unwell? And it's not surprising that our children also don't understand the power of gratitude because they haven't seen their parents express gratitude every single day. But there are some amazing people who understand the power of gratitude, and one such person was Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe won the US Open in '67. He won the Wimbledon in 1975 by defeating Jimmy Connors. People describe that match as the most incredible match in the history of Wimbledon. He helped establish ATP, was very popular across the globe, had a huge fan following. At the age of 36, he had a heart attack. He then had a bypass surgery. 4 years later, he had a quadruple bypass surgery. And after the second operation, he was given blood. At that time, blood was not tested for HIV. He became HIV positive, and in 1992, he described and told the world that he was dying of AIDS. His fans were devastated. Fans wrote to him from across the world, and one fan wrote, "Why does God have to select you for such a bad disease?" And this is what Ashe replied. The world over, 50 million children start playing tennis, 5 million learn to play tennis. 500,000 learn professional tennis, 50,000 come to the circuit, 5,000 reach the Grand Slam, 50 reach the Wimbledon, 4 the semi-finals and 2 to the finals. When I was holding a cup, I never asked God, why me? And today in pain, I should not be asking God, why me? Let us remember what Lord Buddha had said. Let us rise and be thankful for if we didn't learn a lot, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we got sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. You know, when it comes to parenting, a dad can never come close to the role a mother plays in a child's life. Mothers are amazing. Dads try to be like mothers, but it's hard for them. They try very hard, but it's very hard for them to get it right. Moms will be moms, and dads will be dads. Gandhiji had said, a man can never be a woman's equal in the spirit of selfless service with which nature has endowed her. When Edison was a little boy, he came home one day with a letter, gave that letter to his mother and said that the school gave it and they said, only your mother is to read it. What does it say? Edison's mother started to read the letter and started to cry and said, the letter says, your son's a genius. Our school is very small. We don't have appropriate teachers. You should teach him at home. Years later, Edison became a great inventor. His mother had long died, and one day he was going through papers in the cabinet and he came across that letter. He decided to open that letter and read it, and the letter read, your son is mentally deficient. We cannot teach him at school anymore. He's hereby expelled. Getting emotional, Edison wrote, Thomas Edison, a mentally deficient child converted into a genius by his mother. That is the power that a mother has. That is the impact a mom has on a child's life. A friend sent a WhatsApp message, and this was about this little girl in the Middle East. It was getting late at night and she wanted to sleep in her mother's lap. So she took off her shoes, took a piece of chalk and drew her mother on the floor of her orphanage and went to sleep in her lap. Thank you very much, friends, for this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. So we have few questions. So I'll just read for you.
Please.
So the first one comes, what parents can do when kids don't listen to them at all? Like when you tell them to study, they ignore and deviate the topic.
Right. The answer to that is, how often do we listen to advice that is given to us? We listen to advice only when we have a very solid relationship with the person who's giving advice. So the question that one has to ask as a parent is, what sort of a relationship it have? How strong is the bond? Because if the bond is really strong, the child will listen. But quite often, we as Indian parents, and I think we have to confess, and both Nandi and I would have done that many times as well, focus too much on studying. And it really does backfire. You really cannot make a child study unless the child really wants to study. So I think the focus really has to be building a strong relationship. More importantly, helping the child find his or her calling. Because when they want to do something, they just do that with a passion, don't they? You have to stop them and they will continue to work really hard if they have a goal. And that's a goal that they decide. We cannot, as parents, expect our children to live our dreams. And typically in Indian homes, we have this, मेरा बच्चा मेरा नाम रोशन करेगा. क्यों करेगा आपका नाम रोशन? वो अपना नाम रोशन करेगा. Why do we expect our children to live our dreams? They have their own dreams. I think the key is really to help them find their calling, help them get a strong relationship where they talk to you. And I think the focus really does need to move away from studying, because honestly, if you just talk about studying, you're not going to achieve success.
Yes. So the next one comes, how do we decrease the screen time for kids?
Yeah, well, That's a very important question, and I think that's become a huge problem. And it really starts with at a young age, because the child is busy. I mean, you are busy, so you want to keep the child occupied. So give the child an iPad and say, okay, watch this cartoon, and this becomes a habit. Now we all know, and as pediatricians, we've seen little children, age 1, age 2, with an iPad watching cartoons all the time. So we've actually encouraged children at a very young age to adopt technology, and they get hooked onto it. We all know that the part of the brain that gets stimulated with watching videos and sort of spending time on the smartphone is the same that actually gets stimulated when you have an opioid. So we have to be very cautious in the early days in terms of not giving exposure. Exposure has to be limited. We need to be tough about this. But very importantly, you can't expect your child to follow rules when you break them all the time. You look at your phone on the dining table, you look at the phone when you're supposed to have quality time with your child, you interrupt a conversation, you interrupt a game, you interrupt reading a book because you have a call, and the child is going to do that when the child gets older. So it's really about being very disciplined yourself, and this is something one has to be really tough about.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, sir. So the next one is similar to this. So Mr. Dinesh wants to know what should be the ideal age for a child to use social media?
Well, again, we have to define what do we mean by social media. So if it's about doing work now, for example, there's a lockdown now, right? So all kids are actually getting their work online at home. So, that is something that, we can't go away from. And that's something that is now a reality, and we need to accept that. But actually, allowing them some amount of social media exposure is inevitable in today's world. You have to decide what the right age is. Do you think it's 12? Do you think it's 10? Do you think it's 14? And I know there are guidelines on different social media platforms and what they suggest as the appropriate age. Very young children do not really know what to post, what not to post, what to sift through and what not to. So it needs to be under supervision. I can't really say that there is one golden cutoff beyond which it's okay. It depends on the maturity of the child. It depends on the kind of environment the child's growing up. It depends on the kind of supervision. If you say an absolute no, I'm not giving you a phone, I'm not going to let you do that, they're going to do that on the sly, and you are going to have no control over it. So I think this needs to be something that the husband and wife need to collectively decide on and agree upon, and then have a conversation with the child.
Okay, so the next one is, what should you do if your child tells you that they want to be the opposite gender?
That's a very complicated situation, and we really do need to get a psychologist and psychiatrist involved in that. This comes as a huge shock to parents. Most parents, find parenting hard. When this happens, it's even harder. So you really have to take professional help. I don't think there could be a self-help kind of situation here. You really need professional help, because there needs to be a thorough assessment and a discussion on the way forward.
Okay, sir. So the next one comes from Dr. Dharam Ranjan. He says, as kids of doctor parents, most of them have almost everything they need in life. How to motivate such children to achieve something over and above in their life?
That's a very, very relevant question. I think many of us, and I'm 51 now, many of us went through a lot of struggle when we started. And what we've done is that we've actually made life very easy for our kids. And what you say is so true, that many of these kids have access to something that we didn't have as children. And because they have access to everything, they take things for granted, and it's very hard for them to work as hard as perhaps we did. And I guess every generation feels that about the successive generation. So I think just by telling the child, listen, you have everything, you don't realize the value of what you're given, because, I worked so hard and all, they just listen, they ignore, they don't even hear. So I think the key here is to help the child identify what really excites that child. If the child's excited about something, honestly, they will do it. And if they're not excited about it, they won't do it. And sometimes in medical parents, we tend to fixate on them becoming doctors. And because that's the best we know, and we know it's a great career. You actually make a difference in people's lives. You bring about happiness. And, we love our profession, so we expect our children to love that. But sometimes they feel, no, I want a work-life balance. I don't want to work the way I've seen my parents work. I want a Sunday. I want a Saturday afternoon. I want my quality of life. And this generation, I have to say, is very particular about working hard and playing hard. They're very particular about work-life balance. To give you an example, in our case, we had this conversation with Devang when he was very young, and he said, okay, I'll come to the hospital for a couple of days and see if I like it. And he went there and he said, no, I don't like it. So we went through career counseling with him. And at that point in time, there were 3,500 career options. So he went through analysis and it became very clear that, there are 2 or 3 professions for him. And so he decided to choose commerce, and that's the way forward for him. He ended up doing BCom and moved on to do an MBA, and that's what he wanted to do. So I think it's important for us to forget that we are doctors and try and understand what the child wants, and then encourage the child, and he or she will then find joy in that. And when they find joy, then success has to follow.
Okay, sir. So the next one comes, should we intervene between small fights of siblings?
Not
What will make them love each other more?
You see, if the children, it's very hard for parents to intervene in little things. Let the kids figure this one out. What happens quite often, and I've seen that, is that we tend to compare, and we'll say, listen, your sister is so nice, and why are you so rowdy? We'll say, your brother's so studious and he listens and you don't listen. And I think comparison is something that kids hate. We should never compare. How do we like to be compared to others? We hate it. So I think that's something that we should never do. Comparisons are an absolute no-no. Let them fight it out. That's how they're going to develop. They will fight and then they will make up. And if you think that they're never going to fight, then that again is something that's not going to happen. It's okay to quibble and it's okay to make up. And I think there's some beauty in making up.
Yeah. So the next one is, how can we compensate for less time we are able to give to kids during the week?
Big problem for doctors. Big problem for us. You cannot spend huge amounts of time. It's a reality. And I'm not even going to suggest that, leave your work and do that. It's not going to happen. Is that when you actually spend time with the child, it's 100% that child's time. You cannot take a phone call. You cannot start giving advice on the phone when you are with your child. Over a period of time, the child will realize that you have a structure in terms of the way you conduct your professional life and the way you conduct your personal life, and there's a balance. Of course, it's very important for the child to have hobbies, so we need to find hobbies. We need to make sure that their mind is gainfully occupied. And this is something we did again, and you might want to try that. I asked my wife and my son one day, what do you want me to change? Because there were things I wanted to change in our son's life. So I started with saying, tell me what you want. And he said, he really wants Sunday afternoon, because he knew I'd go for a round in the morning on Sunday. Sunday afternoon was uninterrupted, and you will not travel on Sunday, and you will not go and do talks in other cities on Sundays. Made a conscious effort not to do that. And we spent every year, for years, every weekend virtually in a movie hall, because that's what we as a family really like to do. And every Sunday we went to see a movie. And even now he talks about it with great memories of that. So ask your child what the child wants, and then slowly the changes that you want to see in your child's life will also happen.
Okay, sir. So the next one comes from Mr. Dinesh Kumar. He is asking, what is the way to achieve balance of tradition and modern values in our children?
Fantastic question. We as Indians struggle with this because we love our culture, we love our heritage, and we really want to be right up there in terms of technology and modern behavior. And I think this really happens when we behave as model human beings in front of our children, in that we respect culture and we respect technology and modernity. And they really have to see us walk that talk. Just talking doesn't help. You really have to walk it. So celebrate the festivals, embrace technology, make a balance of it. Get the child to understand that there is beauty in our culture. Look at the whole world. Hasn't everyone embraced Namaste today? 150 countries recognize the International Yoga Day. So I think we have to have a sense of being proud to be an Indian and inculcate that spirit in the child, and it will happen.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So Dr. Juhi wants to know, how to make my child habit of reading. How to make him habitual for reading.
It's again, I tell you, very tough these days because the kids are hooked onto phones and laptops and TV. So what you have to do is the child has to see you read. If the child sees you read, the child is more likely to start reading. And you have to read together. And if the family reads together, then the child will also make it a habit. And I've seen children walk into the clinic with books because everybody in the family reads. So you can't just expect the child to read and you don't read yourself. It doesn't work.
Right. So the next one is, how should a parent encourage the child to tell about abuse which he or she might have encountered?
Very important, and this remains hidden, and this will only happen if the child is free to talk to you about anything and everything. And quite often a child feels very guilty about what happened. Totally not the child's fault, but that's the way the child is, because the child has this sense of reservation that I will perhaps be judged, and no parent is going to judge a child when it comes to something like abuse, but children worry about it. So I think it has to be an open relationship where the child should feel that the child's not going to be judged, and if that happens, the child is going to speak up. And I think it's important at a very young age to have these conversations with children about bad touch, good touch, and that you need to come and tell us if something happens that should not have happened.
Yeah. So the next one comes from Swarna. She is asking that her son is 5 years old and he's very stubborn. If uh, if they say no to him, he starts throwing objects, hit the door, and act very violent. Sometimes he bites himself. His behavior is worrying them, and sometimes as a parent, they lose patience on him. Please guide.
So first thing is, if you lose patience, don't hit the child, because if you hit the child's going to bring out aggression in the form of violence. Um, Sometimes children can be very stubborn and can be very irritating and very difficult to manage. Sometimes counselors are needed. Sometimes professional help is needed. But by and large, you have to decide on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So you're not going to get your way by yelling and throwing things. What is unacceptable behavior is unacceptable behavior. You're going to get a timeout, and that's the way it's going to be. Do not give in. You have to give in sometimes, but do not give in every time, and decide what you want to give in for. And try and be very calm and composed about it. If it doesn't help, then you need to see a counselor.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So the next one is how to develop courage in kids to face unfavorable situations.
A very important question as well, because children quite often are not used to any failure. And when the circumstances are unfavorable, they want to take the path of least resistance. So you really have to talk to them about examples, perhaps that they can identify with. Perhaps if they're into sports, identify the history of a sports star where the individual has had multiple injuries, surgeries, and then has bounced back, or has gone through some very challenging circumstances in their childhood and has been successful. So you really need to identify examples and talk to them about that, because everyone has a hero, and sometimes you need to find out what in that hero might work to help you sort of move in the direction you want to.
Yeah. So this is a very important question, sir. I think most of the parents would want to know how to give sex education to young children. Is it necessary? What should be the right age?
It's absolutely necessary, and fortunately, you have access to amazing tools. What age, what advice to give, and really could get into a professional sort of approach in terms of downloading stuff from the net. Tons of it's available. It's better you do it, because usually the advice comes from the best friend's elder brother or sister, and honestly, half of that advice is incorrect. And honestly, they get that advice at an age that you can't even think about. So it's better that you start early and follow guidelines that are easily available. You can't really run away from it.
Yeah. So the last question I would be taking. So there has been a saying that it is important to have siblings and that a single child feels lonely at times and doesn't understand the importance of sharing collaboration. So does this stand true?
Well, this is an interesting question, because I'm an only child and we have just the one child. So what happens with a single child is they tend to mature a little bit earlier, because they end up spending time more with adults than with children. Yeah, they do have a problem with sharing. They do. It's a reality. And so you have to work a little bit harder in terms of getting them to part with what they consider is their birthright, and they're not used to sharing. So you have to work hard on this. It is something that requires some extra effort.
Yeah. So, sir, one last question we are getting. So, will single parenting affect the child's behavior?
Single parenting is a reality in the world today. It's a reality in India. It depends on how you take on the role. It's very hard. A single parent, as a working parent, quite often the case, have responsibilities at work, have responsibilities for the child. You have to do what two individuals do, and which is not easy for two individuals or one individual to do the job of two as effectively as a couple would, is not easy. But honestly, I just gave you the example of Ben Carson. When Sonia used to judge those papers and grade them, the boys were mighty impressed. Years later, they discovered that Sonia never really analyzed those essays because she wasn't very well educated. So she just gave random grades, but those random grades changed the lives of those two brothers. So I think it's hard. It depends on your strength and your wisdom. And I don't think it actually, if you're able to do this well, and I know it's hard, it doesn't really have an impact. I've seen some kids who've done exceptionally well, and not just about material success, but just been beautiful in terms of the way they've handled relationships, the way they've handled different aspects of their personality, and they were raised by very strong single parents.
Thank you so much, sir. So, sir, what would be your last message for our audiences?
The last message would be that we are all very blessed to be parents, and I assume virtually everybody who's on this session is a parent. It is the greatest gift God could have given us. It is, of course, our duty to make sure that we do the very best in safeguarding their future. All we can do is give it 100%. We should not worry about how successful they will be. Our job is to just provide them with the right environment, provide them with unconditional love. And there will come a time when we will more be like friends than parents. And I think that transition now happens at a much earlier age than it happened with us. In fact, I often say that we are the sandwich generation. We could never say no to our parents, and we can't say no to our children. So we are a unique generation in the history of time. But I think whatever we learned from our parents, we need to be able to pass that on to our children in a manner that they can understand, in a technique that is very different to the way we were taught. And all we can do is give it 100%, prepare our child to face the world, and then just it's their destiny. We can just let them fly, prepare them how to fly, but let them fly, and they will find where they have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. With this, on behalf of Dr. Reddy's, I thank our speaker and all the participants for taking time out. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. We leave you here with this thought and wish your day to be filled with positivity and good health, because good health can't wait. Jai Hind.